Israel's genocide against the Palestinian people of Gaza has resumed. Israel has announced a total siege on Gaza, blocking all humanitarian aid from getting in. And it has done this, in theory, to unilaterally impose new ceasefire terms in defiance of the deal that's been agreed. In practice, clearly, this is a deliberate attempt to collapse the ceasefire and unleash Israel's greatest military mayhem yet, with the aim of implementing Donald Trump's forced removal of the surviving Palestinian population of Gaza. Indeed, Israel's military attacks on Gaza resumed yesterday, and bear in mind, dozens of Palestinians have been killed by the Israeli army since the so-called ceasefire began in January. All of this is being suppressed and misrepresented by the vast majority of the Western media, who once again cannot do their basic task in explaining the inarguable facts because their coverage is so slanted in favour of pro-Israel narratives. Now, yesterday, the official Prime Minister of Israel account tweeted the following: with the conclusion of the first stage of the hostages deal and in light of Hamas's refusal to accept the Witkoff framework for the continuation of the talks to which Israel agreed, Prime Minister Netanyahu decided, as of this morning, entry of all goods and supplies to the Gaza Strip be halted. Now, I'll come on to what they say about the continuation of the talks, the framework, the Witkoff framework. Firstly, before I do, what you've just heard there is a confession of a war crime. There is no ifs, there is no buts, there is no debate to be had. There is no other possible legal interpretation. This is a confession of a war crime. It is a war crime according to Article 33 of the Geneva Conventions, which states no protected person may be punished for an offence he or she has not personally committed. Collective penalties and likewise all measures of intimidation or of terrorism are prohibited. Succinctly, this prohibits the collective punishment of a civilian population. That's what this is. Collective punishment. It imposes a punishment on the civilians for having committed no crime. They are innocent civilians. You cannot impose a punishment upon them, depriving them of the means of life. It is against the law. Furthermore, as per the International Court of Justice, which is the United Nations highest court, this is, of course, the highest court on earth. Gaza, like the West Bank and East Jerusalem, is under Israeli belligerent occupation, as summed up nicely by two legal experts in the Journal of Conflict and Security Law, as an occupant asserting effective control over Gaza, in addition to having an obligation to provide humanitarian guarantees under international humanitarian law to the civilian population in Gaza, Israel has a duty to provide fundamental human rights under international human rights law. This means, of course, ensuring the means of life are provided. Furthermore, as the legally binding provisional orders of the International Court of Justice ordered last year, the State of Israel shall immediately take all effective measures to ensure and facilitate the unimpeded access to Gaza of United Nations and other officials engaged in the provision of humanitarian aid and assistance to the population of Gaza. Furthermore, as if we need another furthermore, the core plank of the arrest warrants issued by the International Criminal Court against Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant focus on exactly this: starvation as a method of warfare. Now, even though the likes of Gallant at the very start very explicitly announced a siege against what he described as human animals, Israel spent the genocide gaslighting us all about it, despite in practice doing everything possible they could do to impede the entry of aid into Gaza and then impede the distribution of aid throughout Gaza. They kept pretending that they were allowing that aid into Gaza. Well, they're not doing that now, are they? They are openly confessing to starvation as a method of warfare. They are stating they are blocking aid from entering in order to achieve their aims in negotiations. Let's listen to Benjamin Netanyahu here.
ואני רוצה להבהיר דבר נוסף. לא יהיו ארוחות חינם. אם החמאס חושב שניתן יהיה להמשיך את הפסקת האש, או ליהנות מתנאי שלב א', מבלי שנקבל חטופים, הוא טועה בגדול.
He says here there are no free lunches. Well, actually, Israel is obliged to allow aid to get into Gaza. That is the law, and simply adds weight, as if more weight was needed, to the arrest warrants which are out for Netanyahu. as well as his former defense minister. Now, according to Israel's public broadcaster, Car News, Gaza has enough food supplies for 4 months. So in order to enforce the siege, it is halting all fuel supplies, that is, Israel is, which is absolutely critical for, say, distributing aid to the population via trucks. It also is considering cutting off water to the whole of Gaza. I don't need to explain the implications of that. And fresh, clean water is in desperate limited supply throughout Gaza. Indeed, while aid is being allowed into Gaza as part of the ceasefire deal, the Strip is in a catastrophic situation after Israel's strategy of annihilation. As Oxfam note, when our teams assessed the conditions in Gaza in the wake of the January 19th announcement of a temporary ceasefire, they encountered apocalyptic scenes of complete destruction and famine-like conditions. People in Gaza are in need of everything: life-saving water, food, sanitation, and other necessities, as well as equipment critically needed for restoration of water and electricity. The goods that were able to enter during the weeks of ceasefire have brought some relief, but remain a drop in the ocean. Even in this ceasefire, Israel keeps blocking vital supplies, such as medical equipment, on the grounds they could have dual use. That is supposedly turned into weapons. The healthcare system has been ravaged. There is an acute lack of shelter for a population that has been repeatedly violently displaced, almost all of their homes destroyed or damaged beyond use. There's no sewage system and human waste is overflowing. Israel refuses to allow that to be removed. I could go on. Now, the Israeli finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, last month called for the gates of hell to be opened. He says now that the move now imposed by Israel was the threshold of the gates of hell, adding, now we need to open those gates as quickly and lethally as possible on the cruel enemy until absolute victory. Talking about cruel enemies there, whilst blocking all the means of life and demanding a catastrophic renewed military onslaught. Astonishing stuff. Where was the media coverage of all of this? Listen to the brilliant independent journalist Rachel Shabby calling this out on the Sky News paper review.
First of all, I want to just note that all the papers are leading with this, and none of the papers have anything about your second leading story, which is about Israel collapsing the ceasefire and blocking humanitarian aid to Gaza, which is a war crime. And it is striking that that has not made any of the fronts. There's a couple of nibs, one on the FT, one on the Times.
Sky News itself framed Israel ripping up the ceasefire deal and opposing an illegal siege like so. Hamas rejects Israeli request to extend first phase of Gaza ceasefire deal. Indeed, the CNN headline read as follows: Israel stops humanitarian aid into Gaza after Hamas rejects extending ceasefire's first phase. All of this is deceit. It is deflecting blame away from Israel deliberately. As the Palestinian analyst Mohammed Shahada points out, the agreement states phase 1 should be automatically extended indefinitely as long as phase 2 negotiations are ongoing. Israel is trying to stop phase 2 of the ceasefire deal happening, which allows for a lasting ceasefire to end the war. That's what it paves the way towards, and indeed to end Israel's genocide. Now, the Israeli state say they agreed to a proposal from Steve Witkoff, Trump's Middle East envoy, to extend the first phase rather than proceed to the second phase. As Dropsite News' Jeremy Scargill reveals, it was announced that Hamas had rejected the deal before they'd even been briefed on it officially. Now, the job of journalists should be to tell the facts. So let's listen to this from the BBC, shall we?
While the United Nations and several Arab countries have accused Israel of breaking international law after it stopped all humanitarian aid from entering Gaza. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu made the decision after Hamas refused to accept an American proposal to extend the first phase of the ceasefire, which expired on Saturday. Hamas says blocking aid is cheap blackmail.
Why does the BBC say Israel is accused of breaking international law? It is a fact that international law is being broken here. You can't turn that fact into a subjective opinion. It's not a violation of objectivity to state the facts. If your house is on fire and you say your house is on fire and I say your house isn't on fire, the job of the journalist there is not to go, well, one person says a house is on fire, but the other person says it isn't on fire. The job of a journalist there in those circumstances is to state the truth. Now, furthermore, this report from the BBC frames Hamas rejecting as if it's Hamas rejecting Israeli proposals to extend a ceasefire rather than Israel violating the agreed ceasefire deal. As for the European Union, they issued a statement which is a total disgrace. They condemned the refusal of Hamas to accept the extension of the first phase of the ceasefire agreement in Gaza. What are they on exactly? Israel has unilaterally ripped up the ceasefire deal because the second phase moves towards a lasting ceasefire, which Israel doesn't want because Israel wants to keep committing genocide. Israel has further resumed armed attacks in Gaza, killing and wounding civilians in Rafah, Beit Hanun, Khan Yunis, amongst other places. A dental student in Gaza tweets an image of an explosion in the sky, adding, Gaza right now from my window, it's getting worse, feels like this is the end. The resumption of genocide in Gaza isn't the only horror being cooked up by Israel. Israel has been looking for excuses to invade Syria, using the pretext of defending the Druze minority there. Israel Katz, the defense minister, declared, "We will not allow the extreme Islamic regime in Syria to harm the Druze. If the regime harms the Druze, it will be struck by us." Netanyahu and Katz specifically refer to what is being described as the Druze village of Jaramana, but as the Syrian doctor Karim Aligian puts it, this is insane. I don't know a single Syrian who ever considered Jaramana to be a Druze village. It's not even a village, it's a suburb of Damascus. In fact, you'll find that besides Druze living there, it's more predominantly populated with Iraqi Christians and Palestinian refugees who indeed fled from Israel's genocide. The deceptive Israeli propaganda campaign against Syria has gone on complete overdrive. Indeed, this is just an excuse to get the Israeli forces essentially to Damascus. I mean, it's very transparent what they're doing here. And much of the Israeli state was to balkanize Damascus. They want to divide it into statelets. The Druze citizens of Syria have been protesting against Israel's claims to be protecting them as an excuse to impose an occupation on Syria. Indeed, following an agreement with the Druze, the Syrian general security personnel entered Jaramana and were waving the Druze flag as a sign of unity. Now look, the news from the Middle East seems unrelentingly grim, not least as Israel resumes its genocide in Gaza and as Donald Trump threatens the violent expulsion of the entire surviving population of Gaza. But hope has come in an unlikely place. No other land was made by a Palestinian-Israeli collective of activists and journalists. It is about the ethnic cleansing of Masafa Yatta in the West Bank by the Israeli army. That's where one of the directors, Bassel Adra, comes from. It's a film about what's happened to his home. Yesterday, No Other Land won the Oscar for Best Documentary. Before I explain why it offers hope, let's hear the acceptance speech from Bassel Adra and his co-director, the Israeli journalist Yuval Abraham, who I've interviewed previously about his journalism exposing Israeli war crimes.
Thank you to the Academy for the award. It's such a big honor for the four of us and everybody supported us for this documentary. About 2 months ago, I became a father, and my hope to my daughter that she will not have to live the same life I'm living now, always fearing settlers' violence, home demolitions, and forest spill displacements that my community, Masafa Yatta, is living and facing every day under the Israeli occupation. No other land reflect the harsh reality that we have been enduring for decades and still persist as we call on the world to take serious actions to stop the injustice and to stop the ethnic cleansing of Palestinian people.
We made this film, Palestinians and Israelis, because together our voices are stronger. We see each other. The atrocious destruction of Gaza and its people, which must end. The Israeli hostages brutally taken in the crime of October 7th, which must be freed. When I look at Bassel, I see my brother, but we are unequal. We live in a regime where I am free under civilian law, and Bassel is under military laws that destroy his life and he cannot control. There is a different path, a political solution without ethnic supremacy, with national rights for both of our people. And I have to say, as I am here, the foreign policy in this country is helping to block this path. And, you know, why? Can't you see that we are intertwined? That my people can be truly safe, if Basel's people are truly free and safe, there is another way. It's not too late for life, for the living. There is no other way. Thank you.
In front of the whole world, Israel's occupation, apartheid, ethnic cleansing, and annihilation of Gaza was denounced. Now look, as heartening as this Oscar win might be, some of you might reasonably ask, why does it really offer hope? What is a documentary winning an award compared to Israel's genocidal onslaught against the Palestinian people? Well, I'll tell you, that Israel's genocide is currently succeeding is unquestionably true. But a film about Israel's murderous occupation, about its murderous oppression of the Palestinian people, won an Oscar, despite this being the height of a McCarthyite campaign against anyone who dares speak out about the horrors being inflicted on the Palestinian people. This is a film which couldn't find a distributor in the US because they all refused to have anything to do with it. And what this signifies, this Oscar, it's a symptom or emblematic of Western society being increasingly repulsed by Israel's depraved behavior. Israel is losing in the worlds of public opinion and culture. In time, those Western societies will force their governments to stop arming and supporting Israel, and Israel depends on that support in order to continue its hideous oppression. Another thing too for those cheerleaders of Israel's depravity. In the here and now, in this time of Israel's critics being silenced, hounded, harassed, sacked, arrested, if an Oscar is being won for this kind of film, what happens next is nailed on. You are going to go down in history as depraved monsters, and there is nothing you can do about it. Please like and subscribe with your thoughts and your comments. Help us as we expand across different social media platforms to reach new audiences and challenge the broken media ecosystem that we talked about in this video and elsewhere. Listen on the podcast. You can now, wherever you get your podcasts, it is regularly updated along with the videos. Share the video. Like, subscribe is good for the algorithm. I'll speak to you in a bit.